Hello. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon for those of you joining in Asia. I know there are people all over the world, so good afternoon, good evening. For me, it's good morning. My name is Louise. I'm actually joining from London, UK, currently 6:45 a.m. in the morning. And so you can tell what an important and interesting discussion this will be, because I don't wake up at 6:45 for many organizations. I'm delighted to be here to host, I think, what is your final discussion of the forum. I understand you've had some incredible sessions, which I'm looking forward to listening to again. And this final discussion, we've saved the best till last, is focused on people and leadership. And what I promise you is a really exciting, fascinating discussion over the next 90 minutes. So welcome to the session. Before we go into the introductions of your esteemed speakers, who I'm honoured to share a panel with and talk to today, just to let you know, the Q&A function is in the chat. This is going to be a very relaxed conversational session. Don't expect panels, don't expect presentations and lots of slides, but rather kind of provocative, hopefully, conversations that go into really deep places that I think are important for the social change work that is so necessary for us to do. So the chat is open, the Q&A is open. If you have comments, questions throughout, please just put them in the chat and I will try my best to incorporate them into our conversation as we go along. So without further ado, let me just tell you a little bit who I am and the organisation I run. My name's Louise Pulford, as I said, calling from London, UK, although we're a global organisation. I have team members in Singapore, in Hong Kong and Canada, as well as a core team in London. And we work all over the world. Our executive board stretches from San Francisco to Adelaide. And we've had the honour of working with Yayasan Hasanah for the last few years. We're a network or an exchange at our heart, focused on social innovation, helping people find creative and new ways to solve the incredible challenges that we face in our society today. And so it's for that reason that I'm delighted to be part of this extremely important forum. Let me first introduce our incredible panel. I am not going to read out their bios. Many of you will know them already, and you can look online or LinkedIn on the forum website to learn more about these incredible people. I will just tell you who they are in the conversation, and they will be able to introduce themselves in a slightly different way, maybe that you don't realise, maybe that's not read, that you can't read online as we go into the conversation. But first, absolute honour, let me introduce Datuk Yasmin. We will have an informal conversation here, and so I will not go by your full name, but I must say that Datuk Yasmin is the chair of the Heriot-Watt University in Malaysia and chairperson of Skymind Holdings as well. She is much sought after as a global thought leader and in digital economy, transformation, consultancy, and implementation across the region. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure.
Welcome. Our next speaker is Jalil Rasheed. Again, many of you will probably know, the Group Chief Executive of the Berjaya Corporation, bringing with him 18 years of experience in senior leadership, investment in Europe and Asia. Also a huge football fan, very important, so am I. And so welcome to the conversation, Jalil.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And finally, really don't need any introduction to Dato Shahira. Welcome and thank you so much, Shahira, for hosting this incredible forum with your team for all of us. As you all know, she's a trustee and managing director of Hasanah and has been leading the organisation for several years now. and has just done such an incredible job throughout COVID in transforming the organisation. And so if we're having a conversation around people and leadership, we are most honoured that you can be part of this conversation. Welcome, Shahira.
Thank you, Louise.
So let's get to it. It's your chance, wonderful speakers, to introduce yourselves in a little bit more detail. And so you can do that through the first question that I'm going to ask you, which is really what does good leadership really mean to you? And what are you most passionate about in terms of leadership in the organizations that you've worked in and the organizations that you're a part of today? So let's go to Dato Yasmin first.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise, and please call me Yasmin. Well, thank you for the introduction. I must say that how I would describe myself is that I'm a tech geek. I'm also a digital advocate, and I'm a veteran. I'm proud to say I'm a veteran in the IT industry, and also a football fan, by the way. I will not say which club. I'm now a closeted Chelsea fan.
Good, we can come on to that later.
Closeted for now. After being one of the pioneering graduates of computer science, now computer science is so well known, but at that time it was one of those up and coming courses. So I took mine in Australia, and I graduated in computer science and applied maths, and have been in the industry since then. So 30 years. So I beat you to it, Jalil. You're 18, right? I can say 30 years. And my industry, change is the only constant. And disruption and challenging the status quo is the name of the game. And over the years, over the 30 years, I've seen my fair share of disruptive innovation over the years. From the time that Bill Gates said that there'll be a PC, a computing power on every desktop, to the time when Steve Jobs came out and said there's computing power in your palms, just for smartphones and so on. But, I was excited through all of those, the internet buzz, internet boom, internet bust, but I have never been more excited and also more terrified of the disruptive force of the coming years. I mean, if you look at AI alone, AI will unleash the war for data versus privacy. It will unleash the crisis of the algorithm, where AI models will be mired with biases. There will be need for transparency and accountability. You know that there is now a profession called the algorithm auditor. Yes.
Oh dear.
Algorithm auditor. There'll be regulations, and then if you couple what's happening in the AI in the tech world, AI with IoT, blockchain, and so on, and you put in the other innovation that's happening around biosciences, material science, quantum computing, you're going to have this explosive potential of disruptive innovation. And of course, all of this, you top it off with this, what I call the almighty enabler, which is the power of the internet. What it does is that the internet will bring innovation to the masses at speeds that we have never seen before. And you may have heard this analogy, and I always like to use it. It's about how innovation gets to the mass market or reaches 50 million of users. The telephone took 75 years. Facebook took, in the era of the internet, Facebook took 3.8 years, and Angry Birds took only 35 days. So to answer your question about leadership, to me, good leadership comes from this context. So the answer is the question that we have is how then do we build leaders who can ride this wave of innovation comfortably and stay on top of it, as opposed to being caught like a deer in headlights, or worse still, being swallowed in these waves after wave of innovation. So that is the kind of leadership that I feel is needed, and that's the kind of brand of leadership that I have tried to bring into the organization that I have been in. So collectively, I call it the adaptive leadership. And I want to just go through it. We can have a discussion about it later, but I just want to go through it very briefly. Adaptive leadership to me is about a leader who is anchored with a strong sense of purpose. because in the riding a waves, you don't know exactly where you want to go and have the conviction of where you want to go, then you're going to easily get lost. So that's number one. Number two, a good leader is someone who possesses, good leadership is about possessing humility. And the ability to surround yourself with smart people, the ability to, the passion for collaborative thinking, which is what I share. I want to surround myself with people who are smarter than me and get into the mode of collaborative thinking, because you know what? What is right today will be wrong tomorrow, chances are. So how do you get into this mode of constant rethinking and injecting yourself, surrounding yourself with great ideas and great people? The third one is leadership. Good leadership needs courage, because there is no precedence. When you want to innovate, you have to say, let's look into what somebody else has done, because innovation means you're going to new frontiers. So you must have the courage, and that is I think synonymous. That is something critical for good leadership in the context of my world of this disruptive innovation. The fourth one is could be, maybe you may not agree with this, but to me it's very important to master. A good leader must have the ability to master the art of storytelling. Because as you're trying to pioneer something and do something different, you must be able to inspire and convince people to follow what you want to do. And this is a very important component of a company that wants to be in a constant state of change. So that's the fourth one. And the last one I think is really important is that, and I think this applies to all levels of all kinds of leadership, not only in the leadership in the disruptive innovation world, but it is about being authentic to who you are. And it's about having unrelenting and uncompromised level of integrity. So those would be I hope that answers your question. It's about adaptive leadership and having these 5 key traits.
Yasmin, so much to get into there. Thank you so much for that introduction. We're going to go straight to the other introductions, then let's deep dive into some of those points that you mentioned. And just a reminder for our speakers after the introductions, this is a free flow conversation. So if you have things you want to pick up from each other, please feel free. Jalil, why don't we go to you next? Tell us a little bit about who you are in relation to this question of what good leadership looks like for you. Give everyone a bit of background to where you're coming from in this question and where your passion lies.
Yeah, so my background has been in investment management. So I've had the privilege after I graduated to have worked in investment management, where my job primarily centered around meeting companies, speaking to leaders, CEOs of those companies, founders of those companies, to understand how they were running their businesses, how they were managing their people, how they set culture. And this was across various countries, across various industries. So I was very privileged as a fund manager for 18 years. I was actually paid to learn and just take in all this knowledge from wonderful leaders, and also where they shared their own failings and success as well. And throughout that time, I've also had the benefit in my career, having worked with a British firm, to understand how cultural nuances of how things were managed, even within a firm. Having been with a British firm, then having been with an American firm, then having been with a government firm, and now being with a Malaysian company, which is more entrepreneurially run, and cultures differ. And the other one was also having worked in projects in places like Japan, Indonesia, UK, US as well. So I always say that I've been quite fortunate. I had a job where I could put through all this knowledge and bring it together, and that has been my own leadership example as well. When I first started working, I always said I wanted to do 2 things in my life, which is either to be involved in cars or to be involved in football. 19 years into my career, I now am involved in a car business, and I chair 3 football clubs. So, persistence pays. luck plays even a bigger role. And leadership, to me, I think I kind of bucketed it down in three. A bit, some might overlap what Yasmin mentioned, but the first for me is communication, right? A leader must have the ability to communicate, because you are the ambassador of the company or the voice of the company. If you are unable to articulate the strategy or purpose or values of the company, it's not going to transcend down. So like it or not, leaders must have the ability to articulate that in an easy to understand way. I always say that, the same message can be broken down into 5 different ways, depending on whom your audience are. So that itself is a skill. And beyond the ability to communicate is also having that two-way communication with employees as well, and having that regular feedback loop. I remember having worked in previous organizations where we did the 360 evaluation, where my colleagues would evaluate me as well, and that's a massive culture shock. For other people to give feedback on how they perceive you. And I've had that, I guess, privilege or the eye opener to have gone through that process, and I want to do the same thing as well, and have that two-way communication. And then I guess and that also involves having a bit of an open culture as well. I don't think every leader can accept that, maybe perhaps sometimes a criticism or that, but I've developed quite a thick skin over the years, so it has come quite easily for me. Second is having a purpose, and this is very important. It may sound a bit like a fluffy kind of statement, but these are questions that increasingly are being asked in interviews right now. What is your company's purpose? What have you done, right? Where are you making a stand on certain issues? What is your view on this? So it is very, very important to have the purpose. I'm not saying firms need to be everything for everybody, but at least be able to kind of anchor themselves in a few key things that they absolutely believe in and really want to use their own leadership position to kind of make an influence, and that purpose would also come with some sort of accountability and empowerment as well, right? Third, I feel that is much more prevalent in this current age is having a bold but leadership, but also with empathy. I think what has happened over the last 2 years has been how firms have tried to kind of mitigate the challenges of the pandemic, but having to do that in a much more human way, which seems like common sense, but was a very difficult transition for many who were very used to having a very policing kind of structure where they were told exactly yes, no. So finding that kind of flexibility balance was difficult. I always said that, firms that have rode through this pandemic well are very, very well positioned for the future, because they're able to kind of navigate not just moving from working in the office, but also working digitally, then realizing, oh, wow, certain things are quite effective, but also transitioning from a culture perspective, which is probably the most difficult thing. So those would be the 3 things I would say: communication, purpose, and bold, but yet leadership with empathy.
Wonderful, Jalil. Thank you so much. Again, lots we can dive into, and as you said, quite a lot of overlap, and so it's very interesting to see those kind of common threads, despite coming from different backgrounds and experiences that kind of hold together as important for people and leadership. And I love that people is a key part of this event, discussion, conversation as well. People is so important at the heart of this work. So Shahira, the same question to you. In the context of introducing yourself, what does good leadership look like to you, and what are you most passionate about in your experience in running your organization?
All right, thank you. And, I have been thrown into the panel. It's quite hard organizing a forum and showing up in a panel at the same time. So I hope I'll do justice. So many things juggling at the same time. But thank you, Louise. I am a mother of 3 teenage girls and 3 cats. I have to say, as the working mother, I have a super supportive spouse who has made my working life bearable and manageable. Just juggling the various roles and hats that we have to play as a working mother and woman. My career in the last 23 years, maybe, have spanned across just 2 large organizations and 1 mid-sized think tank. So I hang around a little while in the organizations that I work with. And actually, as I was reflecting on your question, I was also reflecting on my style of leadership today and what were some of the sort of formative or influencing factors that make me the kind of leader that I am today. And one of the things that came first to my mind is on principle-based leadership. I think when I look back, I have been blessed with having great colleagues and bosses who holds values that are quite aligned to my own values. And I think this alignment and synergy provided a good environment for me to thrive and perform in my early years, coming as a fresh grad. And I think, it's a blessing actually. And, alignment in the values of integrity, transparency, mutual respect, and trust, values that I hold very dear. And that creates great dissonance for me if it doesn't exist in the environment that I work. So I believe it's very important that you work in an organization that is aligned with your own values for you to be able to thrive and do your best. I think the second thing, as I was reflecting, I think that Yasmin spoke about disruptions and the ability to adapt. And I think our attitude towards work is very important. Actually, when I look back throughout my career, I have always been thrown in the deep end. Like, I don't know why and why that happens, but every time I join an organization, they are either in the middle of something or acquisition or some major stuff, and no one to guide me because everyone is busy and just thrown in the deep end. And I think that, as I reflect, has been really good for me. Like Jalil said, free tuition and steep learning curves and all of that. I had to be creative very early on. I had to be resourceful very early on, adaptive, consistently being pushed out of my comfort zone. So I do believe in the maxim, actually, that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And I think Henry Ford said that. And so I think having a positive attitude has really powered me through many ups and downs in life. And I also do subscribe to the notion that it is your attitude and not your aptitude that will determine your altitude, right? So good balance of EQ and IQ. And finally, Louise, I think my own core values growing up, right? I remember, my dad, he reads a lot of, he's an avid reader, philosophy, Sufism, and all of that. And I remember, he used to sit us down late at night and, just chat line. In those days, it was Dad's ramblings, and we used to toss a coin, like, whose turn is it going to be today, to just listen to him and his stories, and but somehow, as I think back, a lot of the values imparted during those storytelling, I think some of the speakers spoke about storytelling, did stick till today. And coincidentally, I think the issues on charity and justice being at the core, where within the context of charity, it was the importance of sadaqah at that time and almsgiving. I think my dad spoke a lot about that. And this sense of always having to give back to humanity, and that sustenance and blessings must be shared. that it's not given to you, but through you. So these are some of the values, and equally a constant reminder on the concept of trust and responsibility. In Malay, we call it amanah. And that's ingrained as well. When responsibility is given, we have to handle it well, we have to handle it fairly and justly, and all of that. And I think this at the core of, Dad's ramblings did have an impact after all. And I think this, as I reflect, I think for my style of leadership, I don't know what's my style of leadership, but I'm rather pragmatic and straightforward, and and perhaps a good balance of the head and the heart. Some may argue that that's natural characteristic of a woman leader, but I dare not generalize. So I wouldn't generalize. So, but that's what it is. And the two questions you asked on passion, I think one, I'm quite passionate about supporting other women leaders. I stand today on the shoulders of so many women leaders before me. I've learned a lot from them. I've benefited from their experiences and guidance, and really that's powering me through as well. And I hope that I could do the same for the younger ones. And I think just in the last 2 years after the pandemic, one of the things that have challenged our capacity and capability is the skill and ability to collaborate. Yeah. Collaboration seems common sense, right? I mean, but really it's quite easier said than done, because in the business world they teach you to compete to win, but it's actually maybe you collaborate to win, right? So So I think this is something that I have now proposed to say it's an important 21st century skill to hone and develop. And hopefully that's something that I can learn, and we can all learn to do better, work together.
Thank you so much for that. So much of what you said resonates with me and how I think about this in my organization too. Just a quick point before we move on. One of the questions already, and building on what you were saying about standing on the shoulders of other amazing leaders, Shahira, and building up your own new women and other leaders as you go forward in your organization, links to the question that's already been put in the chat. Now, I'm not going to ask you this. I'm not going to ask you to answer this question right now, because it takes a bit of thought. Anytime anyone asks me this, I think, oh my goodness me, I can't think of anybody, or there are so many. But one of the questions in the chat is which famous or well-known leader inspires you most, both internationally but also locally? Who is your leadership inspiration? And so we'll come back to that as our kind of final question. I'll leave it with you to percolate through the conversation, and something may pop up. So just a little warning, your final question already will be, who is who is guiding your leadership journey? I leave it with you. And the only other thing to say on that, building on that introduction, is I think any person who is the mother of 3 teenage daughters knows everything about leadership. And good luck.
And 3 cats.
Yeah, complete heroes, all of you parents. Wonderful. So thank you so much for your introductions. Wow. How wonderful to have you all here for this conversation. I'm going to actually start with the first part of our flow of conversation, is to focus on a little bit about the current context we're in. And this is going to be a question for you, Yasmin, but others, please feel free to jump in or ask further questions around this. Because one of the things you talked a lot about is that and something that is on the mind of so many leaders in organizations right now is the period of constant change that we're in currently, and the really uncertain future that we're heading towards. Some of it a little bit scary and definitely unknown. And so, building on your work with kind of constant change and innovation and destructive innovations as well. I wonder, could you tell us, coming out of the pandemic, or hopefully, for some of us coming out of the pandemic, what are your biggest lessons on driving destructive innovations and kind of strengthening institutions that you're leading as you head into the future period? And others, you will have comments on this. But Yasmin, why don't you start us off on kind of biggest lessons on how do you embed these innovations and strengthen your institution?
So Louise, I think in a world that you need to drive change, and as we all know, one of the biggest challenge and the first steps towards driving change is to really build a compelling reason for change, and an arguable, compelling, undisputable reason for change. And often that has always been the stumbling block, especially when you have organizations who are in a comfort zone because of past success. But what the last 2 years had really done, and I'm hoping this is the case because, sometimes people's memories are short. But what it has done is really given a steroid boost, I would say, a steroid shots into things that were already coming. So we talk about e-commerce and the need for transition into the world of trade, of online trade. Now, despite knowing that is really the future, but we were talking about how the lethargy of things and how that was going slowly. And when the pandemic came, boom, you suddenly realize people even on the roadside sellers and realize, oh my God, how do I get online? Even in the area of even what we're doing right now, in the virtual conferences, right? This would not have been possible and done comfortably if there had not been the necessity for doing it, blended learning. So many, many examples of this. So I think that was what has been the biggest change or biggest momentum or impetus towards what I hope is going to be a sustained acceptance towards this culture and the DNA of change. I'm a half glass full person, so I'm hoping, although there's a nagging thought behind me that says that, one thing that we learn from history is that people don't learn from history. So I'll put that nagging thought aside. But, with that, I also want to caution, and it's something always in my thought about when you want to drive innovation, it is not just about driving innovation. It's about driving innovation in a sustained as well as in a scalable way. Because if you think it's driving innovation, you can think about starting a startup, right? I mean, you have multiple startups out there, and they're just driven by a sense of purpose towards making a difference and making a change. But then you realize that they fall off. They fall through the cracks, not able to scale. And there are many, many stories of such unfortunate fallouts. So my question is, after the pandemic, and there is this realization of the need for change, and hopefully that's going to stay, that DNA somehow is going to be seeping through, that behavior or that attitude is going to seep through into the DNA. How then do we build a culture of innovation that is not only driving innovation, but it's also scalable and sustainable? So finding the balance. And that's always been something that I've thought about. So maybe if I can share maybe two very pragmatic experience that I've had, and it is about the first one is to me is about what I call the pendulum swing syndrome. And I learned this from one of my bosses, who is a Japanese Brazilian. And I'm a person who loves to change. Why aren't you not seeing this change? But I think he has to pull me aside. And I was working for a multinational of a tech company, which you would think that should be very receptive towards change. But the pendulum swing syndrome, and I'll tell you what it is. As the pendulum swings, the longer the pendulum is, any little twitch you make at the top, it will have a much wider swing at the bottom. So which means that the higher you go, whatever little decision you make at the top, you think it's a little decision, but as it goes downwards, it's going to have a very big swing. So this swing it's going to be very disruptive if you don't manage it. So the key lesson that I've learned from that is that, I mean, the many, many lessons. One is a reminder to myself of this phenomena. But a big thing also is to keep your organization flat. So from after that lesson, wherever I go, I try to do two things in organizational modeling. And as a lot of leaders know, organizational modeling is probably the foundation of how you build, how you strengthen your institution. And I've always made sure that an organization has to be flat. It may be at the expense of a span of control of you and also of your C-1 leaders, but flat is the only way to, as flat as possible, is the only way to make sure that there is this adaptivity in your organization. And the other thing, which is something that I've really been interested in, but have not had a chance to really implement it as much as I would want to, is really the whole Scrum concept, the whole agile organizational model, where there is no more of this typical structure of you are the head of this, the VP of this, and your schools, you have already put through what is your territory, what is your point of accountability, but it's more of a transient kind of thing. Okay, we have an issue to be, we have a project or a purpose or a objective or an outcome to be driven. Put a team together and put a squad together, scrum it out in an agile way, get it delivered, and then come back. And then similarly, and I really like this concept. It was really being talked about a few years ago, but I don't know to what extent it has come forward. But these are the two things that I have always tried to bring, and I've always focused on when building an organization, Louise. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. And I think your last point is very interesting in the context of COVID and what we've experienced in the last few years, because I think sometimes you see globally at a time actually where we need more agility and more of this kind of thinking, more agile organizations is during a pandemic, when everything is changing. It's time for that stuff to be put into action. But I think sometimes what you saw in the pandemic was actually the organizations retracted and went back to their own way, old ways of doing things, the less agile way. So the kind of irony that the time that you need this most is the time where some organizations go back to very, very traditional ways of doing things. So I think it's a very interesting concept to bring up and to introduce for us here for this conversation. I'm actually going to go to Shahira next, really thinking about the things that COVID has highlighted and some of your biggest lessons, because I know a lot of your work has been quite different and transformational, and perhaps building on your idea of collaborating to succeed is maybe something that came up for you a lot, I know, during the last few years. So yeah, from your experience, what's been your kind of big leadership lessons over the last year and in keeping your organisation successful and stable and doing what it needs to do?
Yeah, thank you, Louise, for that question. So I think we've heard a lot about what the pandemic has accelerated, right? Cancellation of exams, learning online, the concept of work from home. So even collaboration, people recognize the importance of collaboration, but it took a while to actually happen. And then the pandemic just forced us into partnerships and collaboration because we just, had to accelerate that. So I think, for us, the journey has been quite interesting. You're right. And it has made us actually now evaluate and have a very good conversation with the board in terms of the evolving role of Yayasan Hasanah itself. So just for context, I think in the last 2 years, we had to manage 5 times more or distributed aid 5 times more than what we've ever done in the last 5 years of our existence, and about 80% of that was obviously pandemic related. And we had to deliver in speed. We had to change our internal processes to adapt to that need. We typically take 3 or 4 months to evaluate grants, because our grants are long term and we give quite a lot of money, but the pandemic demanded that we turn around proposals and all of that, and we did that in 30 days. We committed to do it in 30 days because that was the urgency of the need. So we turned around requests and all of that. So as an organization, we tested and pushed ourselves, and we kind of reflected on how much of this can happen. So the 5X that we did was not just Hasanah money. Obviously, we also managed funding from government through the various stimulus packages. And because of the urgency of the situation, government actually channeled not just to government agencies, but worked through corporate foundations through a matching grant concept where, aid and assistance can go out faster, right? So I think this has really put us in a position now to reflect. And the other thing we observed is also the team, right? The team, worked above and beyond the call of duty, I suppose, as many of us, if we were required to do it in the last 2 years. And there was this, what was powering them? And I think this is unique for this organization because it was that sense of giving back. It was the sense of, if we don't step up, then, there'll be people who are deprived. So I think this is a unique value and characteristic of the organization that needs to be, I suppose, harnessed or channeled to ensure that, we are doing what we are meant to do, that there is no scope creep, for example, or there is no overreaching of our own mandate. So, as an organization, not just the load of work, what we can do, the evolving role of Hasanah as a national foundation, looking at things like collaboration, the role of civil society, capacity development, sustainable funding, tax incentives, and so on and so forth, but also internally. And, we work from home since March last year. And I think the values of the organization supported this our ability to actually work from home. We realized that we can all work from anywhere now. It's just plug and play. And now we're looking at what is going to be the future of work for us. Are we coming back? I think my team will not be happy if I ask them to come back 8 to 5 again. And it doesn't really make sense anymore. So we're thinking about it, maybe we might do a hot desking concept where I encourage the team to be more at the project sites and go visit your partners. And we need to be listening to the voices on the ground anyway. We shouldn't be in the office too much. So we are all thinking about that. And I must say that it had, I always believe there's silver linings to everything that has happened, and we must not lose the lesson.
Well, actually, so Shahira, just building on what you just said, one of the questions that came in actually, and so I think you're well placed to answer this, given your past sentences, is how leaders today view loyalty, and in an age where everything's changing so rapidly, including kind of job turnover. What's your perspective on that?
On loyalty?
Yeah, a time. I mean, I can guess your answer, but. You go ahead.
Loyalty for me is quite an old concept now. Loyalty is earned, respect is earned, and if individuals feel like they can thrive and do better in a different organization, then they should. And we believe that once a Hasanah squad, always a Hasanah squad, and the more people in and out, it forms a very healthy and robust network of friends and supporters. So, I have always been someone who support what's best for the individual actually when they decide to do something for themselves. And if I usually have a chat and I said, if I think that, I think you're being a bit rushed about this decision, then we have a chat about it so that, it's not an emotional sort of a decision, but, whatever serves the best interest of the individual in terms of their own development and, realizing their own potential. So, and I think our sector, even the way in which people work, we have teams that are consulting, we have teams that are on contract, we have teams that are permanent, and everybody wants to have an opportunity to be able to do good. So that's the other special thing about the organization, right? Special power of the organization. It's like, come and do something good. You can stay for a while, or you can come and go. But bring it and leave an impact, and that's how it is for us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think for us in my organisation, I think we're about growing people who should be then grow and then go on and do something better for the sector. It's not about holding people down. It's actually about building people up, and it's great when people move on. Jalil, before we come to you, I'm gonna go to Yasmin and then straight to you again, Jalil, to both of you to talk about, and there's been a couple of questions on the idea of organizational flatness,
okay,
and what flat means to people. So the first question for you, Yasmin, is how your thoughts on how an organization manages a flat organization, and then that's going to be the same question for you, Jalil, as well. And thinking about less importance around job titles. I mean, this is just different modern organizations, right? Rather than the traditional way of doing it. But what does flat mean to you?
Before I answer that, Louise, I want to just add on to what Shahira said.
Yeah, of course.
Loyalty element, right? So I think loyalty, it at best it has been redefined. The concept of loyalty has been redefined, especially with the incoming of the millennials and the Gen Zs that will form the foundation of our organization. Loyalty to an organization is no longer something that you would expect, like what Shahira said, what you want to be earned. It's more of you have to create an environment. And that's why I think both Jalil and I, we both emphasize on the concept of purpose. Purpose-driven leadership, purpose in an organization, purpose in individuals. I am so big on this, and that is why one of the reasons why I'm with Heriot-Watt is because we are actually doing that. We believe in driving purpose, very early in a young person's life. So the millennials, they won't stay just because you got a big name. They are loyal to their purpose, and to some extent, they are also loyal to the environment, the way, the culture of the organization, to the extent that it allows them to pursue their purpose. Now, when we were growing up, and I am in a much different age group, I'm in a much older age group than maybe Jalil and even you, Louise, but we were okay to actually make a cup of coffee for our bosses, right? And people always come to me and they complain to say that, the millennials now, they don't want to make coffee for you. They think that they must come in and they must go to an important role. I said, I don't think you are. I think you are right and wrong in the sense, because the millennials, they will not make you coffee for the sake of making coffee. But if you tell them that there is a purpose behind it, they will climb mountains, they will swim rivers, they swim oceans if you give them the purpose, right? So that's why I think this purpose-driven leadership is important, because it will drive loyalty, it will drive alignment. So that's the point on loyalty. Now, this whole flatness thing, I'm actually quite surprised at the level of interest is coming out of the flatness. But I totally believe in this, and and I've studied organizational modeling. I've been taught that across all the different multinationals, and American multinationals are almost obsessed with organizational modeling. But when you talk about flatness, I don't know what the question about empowerment of unions. I'm not talking about unions. I'm talking about the flatness structure of your people. And I think the question is around how then do you balance it with somebody who wants to move up and scale up. So I think to me that you've got to separate those two out. I am generous with titles, but it doesn't mean that you got to have some consider senior executive, senior executive, then you go to manager, junior manager, senior manager. So I really want to make that all, that kind of organizational titling is not something that I think will all go well in this kind of organization. But I think it's about just coming together and creating an informal structure of problem solving. And if you have a culture whereby it is you don't want to challenge the status quo because you have this boss and that boss and all that, then I think you will just kill that kind of culture. So the whole idea of having a flat organization is just so that you do not have that kind of bureaucracy. You promote and you encourage a culture of challenging the status quo. So, because I have so many different types of questions here on flatness, so I'm just trying to get to one point of it. So I don't know, maybe Jalil can continue and maybe provide some clarity, and I can add on a little bit more on top of that.
Yeah, Jalil, why don't you go ahead and
why don't you try?
It's important, but we also have some other questions too. So we'll do a little bit of flatness, but then we'll move on because I think there's even more stuff coming up. I told you all. We could need about 5 hours here, but go ahead.
I find the issue of that loyalty quite interesting because it's a commonly asked question, right? And my take on that is that it depends on what an individual has done in their previous job. And some people may have stayed on in an organization for 30 years, but they've done the same thing. But someone has stayed in an organization for 30 years and done 10 different roles. And you come out a lot more, useful and knowledgeable. And loyalty in this day and age is a two-way thing as well, right? In the past, it used to be, you have to be loyal to the organization. But now I think the organizations are thinking about how do we retain staff as well. So it has to be a two-way thing. So on flat organization structure, I love this topic. When I joined my first firm, Aberdeen, it was a very small firm at that time in time, and then it became a very large firm over time. But it was very interesting because everyone from the group CEO sat outside. No one had an office. And I remember when I went to the head office in London, I had my group CEO sitting 2 rows ahead of me, and people were just walking around. And one was cost because we were a Scottish firm, so we never liked spending anything. Second was it encourage a lot of collaboration as well. And I realized how an aesthetic design, you're not talking about organizational design, but just an office design, how if thought was given to it, how it can increase collaboration. So I was very used to that sort of culture. Then when I moved to an American firm, it was a bit of open style and a bit of cabin. And that was for the first time after 12 years of working, I actually had a room, and I felt extremely uncomfortable sitting in a room. So the first thing we did when we moved office was that I said, I'm going to sit out. And then globally, we changed all that to hot desking and everything. And so that's from a design perspective. But then from an organization, I give an example. When I joined PNB and I asked, and my head of HR, how many levels are there? She said 18. There were 18 levels below the CEO. And there was a rule then that in order to get promoted, you had to be in one level for at least 2 years. So that would mean it would take 36 years for somebody to make it to the top. I was 37, so technically you had to be a fetus to make it up to become a group CEO. But then what we did was we flattened the organization structure massively by almost half. And I did the egalitarian route as well by taking out titles from name cards, except the heads, everyone else, because it is very psychological, because people are obsessed with titles because they know that it gives them a monetary increment. And that's why they're obsessed about it. Moving from senior executive 1 to senior executive 2 means that I get an uplift of maybe 500 ringgit or 1,000 ringgit. Hence the obsession. But if you remove that and put bands and say that, look, you'll be based on your output. There's a deliverable that's expected of you, and you are expected to deliver. This is what you're supposed to deliver after 12 months, and you'll be paid for it. Suddenly, that doesn't matter anymore. But that requires a cultural shift. It requires a lot of communication. I realized that also a lot, if you had worked in one organization for a very long time, it was also difficult for people to understand and appreciate because you have not seen it outside. But if you've worked in other places, then you may be able to appreciate that a bit better. But there was a lot of communication that needed to go in. So it's not impossible to do it, but it requires time to move to that. So obviously, it's much, and it's also very dependent on industries. You see, the tech industry embraces that quite easily. Financial services, it'll be a bit hard because people are so hung up on just MD, senior MDs and executive directors and all that. And that's why I said culture in a firm, you just can't say, oh, wow, I love how a Google office looks like. Let's create one here. May not work for you, right? And so I think there is a need for organizations to kind of understand what kind of people they have, what's their demographic, age group, what is it that they want. They may not necessarily want a nice office. They may want better working conditions. Yeah. So, I think a flatness in structure, yes, on paper, that's one thing. But being able to execute it also depends on the kind of organization and industry that you're in.
I want to add just quickly, Louise, on this, right? Because Jalil mentioned about transition from Scottish, American, and to a local company. I transitioned from American multinationals into government. So, and I wanted to do this, to the core of my being. I wanted to do a culture of innovation because we in a government agency, but we were driving an innovation in the industry of innovation. So I want to just offer two things. One is that there are techniques on how to do it, and the technique is that to define a structure where there is a maximum number of levels. Right. So if you say that the deepest you can go is maybe 5 or 6, depending on the size of the organization, and also driven by span of control. So a proper leader, you cannot have, I'm used to an organization where you have a senior executive who has an executive and a junior executive, just one line, and that is considered a span of control of 1-1-1. So I think there's a technique of that. And in terms of the emotional buy-in that Jalil was mentioning, there are a couple of tricks that I feel has worked. Number one is that to make people, what Jalil mentioned, compensation cannot be driven based on that. That's absolutely crucial, KPI. And if we have time, I can just share with you some later on the management of KPI and how KPI can drive this behavior. But also, don't underestimate the Google Office impact. Because sometimes to just drive that perception that you want to be like that, you need to have a physical manifestation. So in that government agency that I was in, one of the things I did was to create a room into a Google impact thing, into a Google thing where you have you have those mandatory bin bags and you have got, a nice environment like a Google office where it's open, people can come in and collaborate. And that really, I was surprised too at the kind of impact it had in terms of changing people's mindset because it caught people's imagination. So I think it's also important while you do the structural thing, but those little nuances, that just, unleashes the imagination of what it could be and what it should be.
I think these are super important. And I think, it really links to what you all started to talk about in your introductions in terms of leadership around humility and understanding people, that they're at the heart of this, and we are creatures of our environments, and how do you create those kind of spaces? I want to just flip the conversation a little bit because and build on your points, both of you actually, around purpose, and go to you you, Jalil, for this kind of bigger conversation, because I think we can get very focused on what leadership means for our organisations, but I think there's something important about leadership in the sector. And I think actually the more we change the environment of the sector and the wider ecosystem in which we work, that makes our internal work easier as well, because it's always, of course, a struggle between what is happening in wider society and how that impacts on our organisations. So let's talk about the wider society and the kind of ecosystem a little bit more, and the role of your individual organisations in kind of influencing and supporting that wider societal change. And I think it's particularly important in the role of business and large corporations, since you have had that kind of experience. So can you tell us about the role of leadership as an organisation in the wider society? You know, things like ESG and all of the kind of reporting standards and thinking about people and planet and sustainability as well. Tell us a little bit more about leading in society.
Yeah, so it's the buzzword, right? You know, when you talk about sustainability and ESG right now, I think if this question was asked probably about 5 to 7 years ago, many CEOs would say, yeah, it's in the back of my mind, I'll probably consider doing it. But now I can assure you a lot of them are either working on it, have a plan, and want to implement it, because it's not just pressure from your shareholders or from the regulatory authorities, but it's from your own clients as well, right? I mean, for ourselves, we've got such a sprawling business. We've got retail, we've got food, hospitality. Within food, you know, people are demanding that, you know, they're asking questions about how does this ingredient come? Are you recycling? You know, where you're getting your energy from, and all sorts of questions, right? Which is all very valid questions, because the only way for you to kind of, as a consumer, you want to make a difference is to not buy the product. That's the biggest message that you can send. So a lot of companies need to kind of change that. And the other thing from an ESG, I always say is that, you know, and we are having this discussion internally now. We've got all our businesses doing their own sustainability ESG initiatives, but how do we as a holding company bring everything together? What are our 2-3 core main things that we want to be known for? And one thing I've told all the company CEOs is that think about what makes sense for you. You know, what are you doing that makes that you are really passionate about? Don't try to be something that you're not, because otherwise then it just becomes a buzzword and nobody lives, right? But if you're already doing it and you put that as an anchor, people know you're already doing it. So it's easy for you to kind of put that as a culture. And I always love this word, culture is how people behave when nobody's looking, you know, and when it comes to ESG and sustainability, it needs to be a culture as well. It cannot be just an afterthought, oh yeah, we're doing this. You know, for us, you know, maybe the pandemic has forced us to relook at our own operating model as well. So that was an opportunity to kind of reset certain things. Some things that we've been doing is that, you know, smart farming solutions that we've been doing within our tech business. You know, we've been doing a lot more on our waste management business and our energy business as well. But you know, from that's on the environment side, and then on the wider leadership, something I'm a bit passionate about is, you know, within my current role, obviously we've been pushing for a solution to the affordable housing issue, which is a global issue, but it is a very prevalent issue here. One is the design of affordable housing. Second is the access to financing for affordable housing. So we've actually created a dedicated foundation to kind of find a solution with a view to maybe fundraising and also kind of spearheading this discussion with the government. In my previous role at PNB, I was very, very involved in trying to get a school children breakfast program up and running. Shahira may know this from, I think Hasanah was also involved in this. And there was a lot of work done towards it because, you know, I felt I have 2 young kids. and you want to make sure that they're well nutrition and everything. But unfortunately, yesterday I think was announced that program is not going to go ahead, which disappointed me. But I think from a wider society, it's important that leaders think about what can their company do that is already in a position of leadership, and how that can impact the bigger society. For example, if you're a property developer, can you think about having an affordable housing design that's different, that makes sense for the current generation? If you're a food company, how do you kind of help schools in terms of a breakfast program and all this? So I think that was what we tried to do in our organizations by bringing all our companies together and bringing our peers and say, let's work on this initiative, let's bring everybody together. And then I guess if you have a voice as a leader, if you're well followed in a certain society, your words carry a lot of weight, whatever you say. So, that very corny term with power comes from great responsibility. Might as well you use that influence in a positive way.
Thank you, Jalil. I'm going to go to Shahira now on this question as well, because, I'm interested in how, I think, as far as I understand, you have worked to proactively transform the ecosystem, the wider society, working with government, working with community, etc. So can you comment a little bit on leadership in the ecosystem and how you see the role of your organization as a leader transforming the ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that opportunity, Louise. I wanted to also speak a little bit representing the, I suppose, non-profit sector, and what does leadership in that sector actually means. And, I was reflecting, over the span of maybe 20, 25 years of working, 20 years of that, for me, was in the for-profit, very sort of, and that was also, ESG and sustainability kind of came a little later. So very capitalist type behaviors and mindsets. And when we started the foundation in 2015, it's actually quite different doing CSR or corporate responsibility in an organization versus actually running a foundation, right? So you come out of the for-profit and you're completely in the non-profit ecosystem. And actually, we had to do quite a lot of rewiring ourselves in terms of the culture, the values, the behaviors of us and how we work with our partners, right? So it's no longer a client agency type relationship, right? It's a partnership with our grantees, for example. We need to kind of bring down the power imbalances, right? You've heard about donor grantee kind of relationship. There's really no such thing. It's a partnership, and we're in this together. We want to solve the social problem together, and the kind of people we have working in Hasanah is a mix of people coming from sort of like the for-profit and from the development sector. So we had to find a common ground in a common space in terms of how do you blend this thinking. You'll have colleagues who are all hard and all kind of, it's okay, and then you'll have those who have said, no, this is the KPI, and they have to meet the KPI, and so just trying to find the balance. So it's been a very interesting journey, and we've basically taken the approach of really listening to the voice of our partners and the communities we serve. Because really that's what we're here for, and then trying to ensure balance with accountability and governance. I think from an ecosystem perspective, yes, the sort of other half of Hasanah's mandate is building capacity and capability of the nonprofit. And I think when we started in 2015, my sort of conclusion was that the sector is quite nascent and that quite a lot of our NGOs are very localized. Their impact is quite local and small, and they do really well wherever they are. But how do you provide sustainability for them and ensure that they grow? And then it was also sort of the thriving moment for social enterprises. We had quite a lot coming up at that time. And, just trying to understand the journey of a social entrepreneur and trying to support that, because it's quite different working with an NGO leader and a social entrepreneur. It's actually quite two different styles. So we will continue. I think a few things that we have been advocating for. One of it is obviously trying to professionalize the sector, right? People talk about accreditation. Do we need an accreditation system? What does professionalizing means? NGOs sometimes don't like to be told how to do things, or feel that they represent communities best and don't like too much interference. So how do we manage that? Around impact frameworks, around financing, around financial sustainability, around governance structures. So we've been doing that. We always say the moment you apply for a grant in YH, the capacity development starts, because we really sort of ask the questions where our grantee is able to crystallize what is it that, ability to tell us what you want to do. Sometimes that clarity is not even there. They have a concept and a lot of heart, but how are you going to do it? We'll figure it out, right? So I think these are all part of the journey. Pay is the other thing. I think in the panel before this, they talk about all of people in the non-profit are trying to really solve very complex issues of climate and gender inequalities, poverty, structural inequalities, and yet, they don't deserve to get paid well, right? Well, why is that? So some of this around professionalizing the sector and around recognizing the talent that we need to solve complex issues, even in the non-profit sector, is important. So we will continue to do that.
Thank you, Shahira. Yasmin, do you have any thoughts on kind of leadership in the ecosystem, the wider societies? You said earlier on you transitioned into government, and so you have experience across these sectors. How can the kind of organisations that we work in influence the way that we think about these things more broadly in society, and that interplay between the organisation and what's going on around us?
Yeah. So I've been hearing what Jalil and Shahira were talking about. And I was thinking about, when you talk about ecosystem, there are basically three pillars to an ecosystem. You have the government, and you have the private sector, and you have the civil society. You have the civil society. And I think in Malaysia right now, and a lot of developing countries, I think the dependency on government to drive policies and to drive change is maybe a little bit overestimated. What needs to be done, I think, is the two things to add on to what they were both saying. First is that, Shahira, yes, I think the strengthening, the professionalism of the NGO, there's so many good people. I just can't believe the heart of that has been put into this, into the NGO in Malaysia in particular. I mean, the example, but they cannot do it alone. I think what really needs to happen is really a shift within the corporate sector, which is the private corporate sector, which is a huge impact. But right now, when you talk about the private sector, it is very much driving for profit. And even for profit, it is short-term profit. It is what you want to report tomorrow in the next quarter. The fact that the SDG goals, by the 2030, how much of it is really just, window dressing, just to get a tick in the box, and how much has really been instilled that the ultimate goal or the ultimate measurement of a corporate is not just about profit, but it's also for profit and good. And that is why I keep on mentioning about purpose. An organization needs to have purpose, and the people will have to have purpose. So, and I think that when that happens, when leadership in the corporate sector either through the groundswell support from the people, from the upcoming leaders, or through regulation. I mean, if somehow Wall Street, can just change itself from just looking at how capital makes capital, but move towards how capital creates value for good, that I think would really make a difference. So, so those are, I know it's a tall order, and I know whether I'll see it in my lifetime, but really the corporate structuring, the corporate, the whole SDG goals cannot just be about tokenism. It's got to be something that people really believe in and really implement.
I'm sure Jalil has a comment on this. But before you comment, Jalil, a question that Yasmin maybe you could start to answer as well, which you'd already started, is around challenging status quo. And the role of leaders to challenge the way we think about status quo and in society more broadly. And there was a question in the chat actually about diversity and tokenism, etc. And so I guess that can come into that a little bit. But just mindful of time, we've only got about 10 to 15 minutes left. So yeah, building on what you just said, how do you think leaders can challenge the status quo? And then Jalil, I'll come back to you to kind of build on those comments too. Yasmin,
you want me to start off? Okay.
Yeah.
So
why don't you start on this, because you were already on it.
Yeah. So challenging status quo is not easy, and I am, coming from an experience where I was in a government sector, where the mantra, all government letters are being signed off as saya menurut perintah, which is literal translation is I obey the orders. So, and that is the mantra that has been going on for many, many years, and still is right now, although there's some attempt to change that. So it takes a lot of effort to get people to change the status quo. And I think it is part of a transformation. Maybe I can give some examples of what I did in the government agency. I made it a value. I made it one of the core values of the company is changing the state, challenging the status quo, and walking the talk by yourself as a leader, and making sure, and sometimes, because the biggest culprit sometimes it's your own senior leadership team. So making sure that the people at the highest level allows you yourself allow and encourage the challenge, and make sure that it get cascaded down. So it is just, there's no magic pill to it. There's no magic wand to it. It is just about tenacity in making sure that that core value of challenging status quo gets implemented.
Thank you, Yasmin. Jalil.
Yeah. So I just touch on a few where Yasmin left off. I think I agree. Things like SDG and ESG should not be a box ticking exercise. Right? Should not be a box. Otherwise, you're losing it. And similarly, tokenism. There's a question in the box about tokenism. It's I think it's nice for people to have all these goals that they want to achieve, but I think they need to do it. I think we've been quietly quite proud of it. Our board is about 60% female, and we've put in place a structure where our search process does not discriminate against whether you're male or female. Even my senior management team is it's quite heavily skewed towards female as well. So those are things that we've been quite proud of. Now, I think in terms of status quo, I think, especially this, I've had probably about 4 roles during my career. And I said the role with the government was the highest and also the lowest of my career, both in one. Highest was at the point of appointment, lowest at the point of leaving. But I think it's very important to stand up and speak to the truth. And I think it's more, I think a lot of people who work in government agencies probably feel this more than working outside of a government agency, where I think, when you when you work in a private environment, I think your stakeholders are mainly the board, your clients, and everything. But when you work in the government, there's a lot of unseen stakeholders, and I think it's very important that is when your purpose and your values stay firm. I always say this to my senior leadership team: if you're ever in doubt, think about whether this makes an impact to the unit holders, because ultimately whatever that we do must translate back to returns back to our unit holders, which is half the Malaysian population. And if it doesn't make sense, if there's any doubt, answer is clear: don't do it, right? And that's how I guided all those very, very difficult decisions and conversations. But I think it's very important to set the tone, because I think if I was of the view when I took on the job that I would leave the job and I would not need the job, and that happened fairly quickly. And then it's very important to create a space for a sustainable discourse built on bipartisan views. And I think there needs to be some ideas around collaboration, respect, and we do need to start the conversation by saying that this is wrong, we should not do it, and people's ability to then make a stand and walk away. But this involves having very difficult conversations, and that's for me is status quo. Challenging it from a wider societal point of view. We've spoken a lot about the corporate. The corporate is like getting management buy-in, this, that, and everything. For me, that's probably. I'm not saying it's easy, but as when you have that ability as a CEO to do that, there are ways for you to kind of do that and pull each lever. But when it comes to the broader society, it's a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult because you're kind of suddenly put in a very public spotlight, and which could be very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah. I'm going to get to Shahira. I'm sure you have comments on this. I mean, you're working across all the sectors.
Yeah. So maybe challenging the status quo. I think if I reflect, they're the big ones and they're the small ones. And essentially, if you kind of defined it as, you don't want to just challenge status quo for the sake of challenging status quo, right? It must be for a better outcome for everyone, not just for you. So I think we all know, I think we spoke about courage. And I think given all of the challenges that we're facing today, we need a lot more courageous leadership that is able to, speak truth to power or challenge status quo, as you call it. But courage, I think, is a skill. And then I was reflecting, Louise, because in our sector, everything is about challenging the status quo, whether it's child rights, advocacy, whether it's gender equality, whether it's education transformation, nutrition. I always say that I know why so many social activists are just so frustrated and just banging their head on the walls because of this, right? Because they've been fighting for change for the longest time. And I think I reflected, and I think that challenging the status quo, like I said, can't just be for the sake of it. And I've seen where change did take place. And before that, I just want to say what Yasmin and Jalil say as well. I mean, the last 12 years, I also worked for a government-linked company, and it is quite difficult to voice out, and if you speak too much, and you're labeled as a troublemaker or anti-administration, or you're expected to kind of toe the line, which then requires even more intricate skills in trying to make change happen. So I think as I think about this, Louise, I think we need to build skills among even young leaders. We have a lot of fired up young leaders. They're idealistic, and I love to see that. I love to see the energy. I love idealism. But I think where we can help them from our experience and a little wisdom, whatever wisdom we have in terms of how they can manage that change in a more informed manner. I think you need to be skillful, you need to be tactical, and you need to be strategic about being effective for example, passion needs to be supported with data, with some intelligence and common sense. You must have some subject matter expertise so that you're effective. It's also you become effective, so you don't become frustrated. So be organized about wanting to push for change. I think that's one of the things that I wanted to say. And the other thing, I think, even from my own experience, Louise, sometimes you want the big change, but sometimes you get the small wins throughout the journey. And I want to say, don't be discouraged by the small wins. Don't underestimate and downplay the small wins. You know why? Because sometimes your stakeholders are actually building their own courage for that big change. So it takes a village, right? And the chain is as strong as its weakest link. So if you have stakeholders who kind of get it, but trying to even gather their own courage to support that change, celebrate small wins. And I think yesterday one of our speakers spoke about the strength in numbers. I think that's Yasmin spoke about Jama'ah, right? It's strength in numbers and do it together. We know about the power of collective voice. That helps a lot. And this has been, our experiences. I can't tell you that, in the 5 years journey for Hasanah, we're still trying to gazette marine parks, protect forests. Khazanah started public school transformation way back in 2010. We're still on that journey. Mm-hmm. I think, Nelson Mandela took about 30 years.
Yeah.
But, so I think big wins and small wins, but I think persistence and having eye on the big win needs to be there, and we all need to, I suppose, build courage. I suppose it's not easy. Challenging the status quo requires courage.
Shahira says a wonderful kind of penultimate comment to finish on, because and I just think that's so important for us to remember that it takes time, and challenging the status quo doesn't need to be angry. It can be subtle, and it can be collective. And I think my own organisation and my existence is around challenging the status quo, but we do it very quietly, and we do it over time. And so I think this is a really important point that you've mentioned, courage as a skill as well. We have about 3 minutes left, which means that you all have 1 minute each to tell us who inspires you as a leader, who's your most inspirational, or where you get your inspiration from, and why. Literally in 1 minute each. And we're going to go Jalil, then we're going to go Yasmin, and then we're going to end. Of course, we should give the final word to Shahira. So, Jalil, who's your inspirational leader and why? Or one of yours, one of many, I'm sure.
So I'm not gonna say people that I've not met, but I think one would be. One of them I quite admire is Piyush, CEO of DBS Bank. Had the privilege of having not worked alongside him, but having met him and in his 15-year journey before he became CEO there. Absolutely quiet operator, but very, very successful. He's turned around a lot of things. I see a lot of what I have done in my career, which is turnaround. To Shahira's point, I've had a lot of painful jobs, having to turn around and integrate businesses. And I've learned a lot from him as well. I have spent a lot of time with him talking about how he has done people change. And some of that is what I am imparting and doing now in my job, how I've pivoted, talking about cultural nuances, that there's no one, and he always said there's no one size fits all. Don't ever be influenced by what people say how leadership should be. It is unique to you and what makes sense to you at every point in your journey. Yeah.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Jalil. And yes, the caveat is you may have many, but you're just going to choose one for this moment. Yasmin.
Oh, no, I've got to do this. I'm counting myself, so it's 1 minute, but I'm going to choose 3. Okay, so the first one is my mother. My mother, who is a head teacher of a school, and I think running a school is like running a nation. Number 2 is Tan Sri Jamila. I think she is one of the speakers in this. I admire her, inspired so much by her because of her heart and soul that she put into her leadership, and it comes across in such a profound way. And the third one is a guy by the name of Adrian Koch, who was a leader in HP, and he made such an impression on me that a lot of leadership skills that I have right now about being authentic, about being transparent, about being fair, about performance driven and so on comes from him. So 50 seconds, Louise.
Well done. Thank you, Yasmin. Shahira, you have an
now I have the tough job to end this. So yeah, it's not my favorite question, Louise. This one,
I'm sorry.
Thing. I'm the kind who takes different things from different people, but obviously, like I said when I started, there are a lot of things that influence me as a person. At the core of it, obviously, my family and my dad and some of the values that we grew up with. He was pretty courageous about things. Calling a spade and speaking truth to power kind of stuff. So I think a little bit of that kind of rubbed off. And then I think, like I said, working in the right, because if there's a disalignment of values and principles, then it's going to be quite hard for me to operate. And, and I've been blessed in my work in Procter & Gamble. I've had fantastic leaders. They have a good value system that's entrenched. And then, of course, in Khazanah, I worked very closely with Tan Sri Azman, who's a very right brain, left brain kind of guy, very very grounded and operate on sound values. And I have a great chairman whom is my mentor, and he everything he says. Pearls of wisdom, Tan Sri Magno Yusof. So, I value the time that I have and whatever advice he offers, he doesn't offer advice all the time, but when he does, I keep quiet and listen. And then, the question on, I think Jacinda Ardern comes across to me as well. I just admire how she just leads so naturally. She's a mother, she's kind, she just do the right thing, she's courageous, she makes decisions, she makes tough decisions if she has to. So I think that's been my journey. And I think I've been blessed to be given that opportunity to interact with wonderful human beings in my life, actually. So I am very thankful and blessed for that.
Well, thank you. It's not my favorite question either, but at the same time, I do think it's important for us to look around because, we want to, as leaders ourselves, grow other leaders in the sector. So it's wonderful for us to be able to think about where those kind of influences come from. I, for sure, in the last 90 minutes have 3 new leaders and inspirations that I will look up to, and they are you 3. Thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation, Jalil, Yasmin, and Shahira. Thank you for your time. I am 1 minute over. I'm so sorry, organisers. Please do invite me back again because I've had a really inspirational 90 minutes. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much, Louise.
A wonderful evening, and thank you to the organisers for such an incredible forum. Well done, all.
Thank you,
all
everybody.
Of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.